Hello again, welcome back. If you've been watching the series so far, then I think you're ready to learn about ADX editing. So ADX is basically just a compressed sound format. It's used for music, voice lines, pretty much any kind of sound effect that you would hear in one of these games. You're going to find most of these in the Sound E CPK. This is the CPK that contains like the localized English sounds, so that's where you would find like voice lines and stuff like that. And for everything else, you can find that in the base CPK if you go into the sound folder there. So if you go in there, you'll find that they have like non-voice sound effects and music and other stuff like that that like doesn't need localizing. But you'll notice we're not finding any ADX files in here. We're only seeing these pairs of ACB and AWB. These are also Cryware formats, and they're basically archives. They're containers that have a whole bunch of ADX files inside them. So in order to listen to the individual tracks that they contain, I'm going to show you how you can extract them and how to play back the ADX that you find inside. We need a program for that called Foobar2000. So let's download that, make sure to get the 64-bit version here. And once I have that installed, I can choose a theme. I like this dark blue theme here. And there's one more thing that we need. If we go back to that website in our browser, you can go to the Components tab and search for VGM Stream. So just scroll down here and download that. And once you have Foobar installed, you can actually just click on that and it'll open up right up here. That's where it asks, do you want this component to be installed? So click yes, then click apply, and then the program will need to be restarted. And there we go. It should be capable of opening up an ACB or an AWB. So let's drag that ACB file onto here and see what happens. Okay, so not quite. Let's try with the AWB. Now it's giving us a list of all the sound files. So now you can identify the BGM by just clicking on one and playing it back and listening to it. You can also find a full list of the music on the wiki as well. You'll notice that these aren't in the same exact order that they are in Foobar though. For our very first mod, I think what we should do is try to replace the music on the title screen. Because as usual, it's the very first thing you hear when you start the game, so it makes sense to test with that. Looks like we'll be replacing the 30th, or really the 31st thing that you see in Foobar. So before we get any further, we should probably learn how to extract and repack the AWB file that we're playing back in Foobar. There's this Persona voice clip editor, or PersonaVCE program that I'm working on. Let me go to the GitHub page and go to the Releases tab to download it. And I'll extract that to a folder and run the PersonaVCE exe. Let me switch to the Archives tab up here. This should allow us to just drag the BGM ACB onto where it says Extract. And that should create a folder with the same name as the ACB right next to it. Inside this BGM folder, you'll see that it has all these ADX files now. So I'm going to copy this BGM ACB and BGM AWB as well as the extracted folder. And I'm going to move these to my P5R Essentials CPK, main CPK, sound folder. And the reason I'm copying them is just because I don't want to accidentally overwrite the originals in case I need them later. If you go inside that, you'll see that we now have our individual ADX files, and they actually start from the ID 0 this time, so they should actually follow the order on the wiki. So number 30 should actually be the title screen song. Let me open it in Foobar and play it. And that is indeed the case. We want to replace this 30 streaming ADX file with whatever song that we want to play instead on the title screen. If the music that you want to import happens to be from another game, then you might be able to use the existing loop points that that game's music already has, rather than having to recreate them from scratch. So for instance, here's another game that also uses ADX. So let's see, if I go to Manage and then Browse Local Files, Resource, GDPC, ADX, here is the City Escape BGM, and if you right-click the track and choose Properties, you'll see it already has the loop start and the loop end. And we can just copy and paste those into PersonaVCE. And in order to get this encrypted, we can change the sound format to WAV, and then drag the ADX file onto the encoding tab here, and that will encode it into a WAV file. And then we can just change the format to ADX, drag the WAV file back in here, and using our loop points, we should now have an encrypted ADX that loops. So that's nice, but there's actually a good chance that you don't even need the game in order to get the tracks from it. I'll explain. So if you go to smashcustommusic.net and then search for the name of the game, I'll type Sonic R in the search box here, then you can pick the track that you want and download it in any of these formats that you see here. It doesn't really matter which, because we're going to be converting it to ADX in the next step. So for this, I'll just download BFSTM, which is the Nintendo Switch audio format. So next, we need a program called Looping Audio Converter. Let's download that zip and extract it somewhere. And the cool thing about using a Looping Audio Converter is, well, you could probably just play this in Foobar and do the same thing we did before, where you get the loop end and the loop start, and then convert it to WAV and all that. Looping Audio Converter does it all for you, so this is especially good if you have a ton of tracks that you want to convert quickly and retain their loop points. So here's our folder of music tracks, and they're all in a bunch of different formats. So what you can do is add this folder. Let's create an output folder. I'll just make a folder named out right here. Next, we need to choose the output format, so I'll choose Cry ADX, and we can leave the rest pretty much as is. And lastly, for that encryption key, you can just click right here where it says key code and paste it in there, and up here where it says encryption type, just change that to say key code, and we're done. You can just press start and it'll automatically change all of these from whatever format they're in into ADX, and you can open each of these in Foobar to make sure that the loop points still work, that it says type 9 encryption, and it seems that these are all set to just be used in game now. So let me use this one, and I'll use it on the title screen. And yeah, so this works fine if you have a song that's already from a different game and you're able to find it on this website, or you're able to rip it from the game itself. But if you have a song that you have no way of getting existing loop points for, I'll show you how you can make your own using Audacity. In this case, for the P5R Adachi mod, I want to play this song on the title screen. I'm just going to quickly download my preferred YouTube downloader here, and I'll change this to audio only and then choose WAV. Then I'll click here to download and install FFmpeg so that it can actually convert the video to sound for me. And once that's complete, let me go to the download location, and you'll see I now have a WAV file of that YouTube video. At this point, I could just go to the encoding tab in PersonaVCE and make sure my encryption preset up here is set to P5R and that the sound format is set to ADX. And then I could just drag that WAV onto here and it'll create this encoded folder here. Inside that, it'll have an ADX, and if you play it, you'll see that the ADX file is now that song from YouTube. You should also make sure that down here in the corner it says type 9 encryption. That's important. If it wasn't encrypted, then it would sound kind of like blown out and weird in game. Now, the only problem we have is that this track does not loop. With the current settings, it will play one singular time and then it will just end in silence. So let's take it a step further and install Audacity so that we can create our very own loop points for this song. I'll just get it from the 64-bit installer here because I really don't want their audio hub or whatever this is. So when you first start up Audacity, you can drag your WAV file into here, and then let's also go to Edit Preferences and make sure that we have a good sample rate. I think 44,100 Hz is pretty good. And if you zoom all the way in, this little point right here is an individual sample. That's basically the smallest unit of what comprises a digital recording of a song. We need to choose a sample toward the beginning of the song that sounds similar to a part toward the end of the song. so that hopefully it can resume playback from that point and then make a perfect sounding loop. So this takes some trial and error to actually find parts of the song that are similar enough, but what you could do is go up here and choose a region by dragging, and then you can kind of put your playback thing somewhere toward the end here, and it'll jump toward the beginning so that you can actually play around with this, experiment, and see how it sounds when it loops. I don't think I want it to fade out right here. I think this could work right here. It's not quite perfect, but I think it'll do. The goal is to make it so that the user doesn't really notice when the song loops and it's just kind of playing in the background infinitely, because now it's just going to continue from this part and then play a majority of the song over again, just excluding the intro the second time, and the outro will never really play because we never really let it get to that point before it loops again. I think I'm pretty happy with these loop points. Down here where it says selection, we change it to say sample so that we can see the exact sample number that we're clicking on. And I'm actually going to note that down in our program here. I'm going to uncheck loop entire track, and I'm going to check use loop points. And I'll just put that number right there. And I'll do the same thing for right here as well. It says 14292.694. Earlier, we went into the preferences and we changed it to 44K Hertz. Let's make sure that we export this wave. Yeah, 44,100, stereo, signed 16-bit PCM. You should change where it gets exported to as well. Let me just export it to our sound folder that we're working in and choose export. That just ensures that this is actually 44,100 Hertz before we convert it. Now let's try encoding it again, but this time with our loop. Let's drag the wave onto here, and then let's listen to the output in Foobar. That way we can make sure that the loop actually still works, and you'll notice immediately the duration is different now. It's actually double what it was before, and that kind of shows that Foobar is previewing the loop for us. So if you go to sort of the middle of the song, yeah, that's where you can listen to the loop. And then it just continues, so that's pretty good. This is what we wanted. We now have an ADX of the song that we could use in-game as BGM. So let's go to our mod's BGM folder and delete the original. So 00030 streaming, let's delete that. And then let's paste this in and rename it to be 00030 streaming. So at this point, you can just drag the BGM folder onto the program where it says Repack in the Archives tab. And what should happen now is that once that finishes, you can see that the size changed and the date edited changed. So that's how you know that it got overwritten successfully. And at this point, we can just launch the game and test to see if that worked. And it is now playing, and if you waited long enough, you would be able to hear that loop in-game, but since we already tested in Foobar, we don't really need to verify that. It'll just work. If you look at the length of the video, you can see that this is far from over though, because we still have to discuss the AWB emulator that we have here. So just like we did with SPR and with Pack, by using that, we can avoid having this massive, almost a gigabyte AWB here that we have to repack every single time that we change the BGM. And we can instead just have our single edited BGM track included in the mod. And that also makes it a lot easier to distribute the mod and for it to merge with other mods. So it's really the ideal way to do this. And now I'm going to show you how you can emulate this AWB inside the F emulator folder. Right next to where we have Pack and SPD, we can create a folder named AWB. And unlike the Pack and SPD folders, we don't actually have to create the path leading up to it. So whereas with these ones, we had to start with calendar since the Pack is in the calendar folder. So you would think that in the AWB folder, we would have to make a folder named sound, right? Since that's where we found our AWB, but that is not the case. For this emulator specifically, you just need to type bgm.awb, and that's the name of the AWB file, and inside that, we can put only the ADX that we replaced. The 00030 streaming we can copy and paste into here, and since we no longer need the BGM folder or these ACB or AWB or really the sound folder at all, we can just delete those. So now we've really shrunk the mod down from being almost a gigabyte just for that one file, and now it's just 15 megabytes, which is so much better. So the game should load a lot faster as well without all of that, and we can even add something onto the file name. That's another perk of using the file emulator for AWB, which is after the streaming part, you can just put another underscore and then just put whatever text that you want to describe the song with. So from a glance, if I had a bunch of different BGM tracks in here, I could easily tell which one is which, and that's a pretty good summary of how to do all of this for BGM tracks. I think we're done there, but now we need to talk about voices. So for instance, in the sound folder, if we go to battle and then scroll down, you'll see BP01.ACB and AWB. And these would be Joker's in-battle voice clips. So let me just extract those the same way as before. There are 410 of these in here, so to categorize these, I recommend making a spreadsheet. You can either use Excel or you can do it for free in Google Sheets. That works just as well. And what we can do is press A to select everything in this folder and then press Enter. And that way we can start listening to these in Foobar and describing what we hear in the spreadsheet. So for the first three, we're hearing some battle grunts, and you can describe them however you want, whatever helps you. You could say taking damage grunt maybe, or you can even be a little bit more descriptive and try to type out the noise, what it sounds like. It can take a while to kind of go back and forth like this when you're doing that, so what I like to do is go back to that components page of the Foobar website. I like to get this thing, which it inserts a configurable amount of silence before each track. Let's try that. Let's download and install that component just like we did with VGM Stream. And if you go into the settings in Foobar, under Playback, DSP Manager, we can add a fixed silence. And if you click these three dots here, it'll let us choose the length of the silence. I think I'll do silence after 3000 milliseconds. That's a good start. So that'll give us 3 seconds of wait time before each playback. So depending on your typing speed, that gives you enough time, hopefully, to kind of write down what you're listening to before it starts playing the next one. And if you miss something, you can always just click on it again. And what I like to do, just for clarity, is since this list starts at 0, we want to go to a number list generator and make a list of numbers starting from 0 up to our last number, which is 410. And I'll just copy that and paste it into the spreadsheet. I'll do that in the first column here. And that way you can keep it straight, which numbers you're listening to, with the numbers on the left column here as well. So in this voice pack around number 31, there are some voices in here that aren't Jokers. So I just left those blank because we're not really going to be changing those. So now let's talk about generating replacements. So if this is the P5 Adachi mod, then obviously we're going to need Adachi voice clips, right? So to get those, I'm going to go to the Sounds resource. This is a pretty useful website where people generally upload ripped sounds from video games. Oh hey look, there's Adachi right there. We've got clips from Dancing All Night, Arena, P4G. Let me just get all of those. And Skyla is also the one that uploaded these, of course. I'll make sure that I'm getting these in English as well so that I can actually tell what they're saying and transcribe it properly. Let me just extract all of these to the same folder once I have them downloaded. Assuming that they have different naming schemes. These P4G ones are named Kamu and then they have the number in brackets, so they shouldn't conflict with the rest the Ultimax ones. So we're gonna need to transcribe these ones as well. Let's do that in a different spreadsheet tab. If you click Add Sheet, you can create a new tab in that same spreadsheet and you can switch between them. So the idea here is that once we can kind of see which voices would be fitting for certain scenarios, you can highlight them and copy both the name of the file and the transcription and paste them over next to these two columns, next to the original Joker transcription, and kind of line them up. So here he is summoning his persona. So any lines that you recognize and you know they serve a certain purpose, you can just find equivalents that you like and paste them in next to them. And by the way, here's how you would get the file names to paste in that one row there. Go up here and type CMD and then press enter. That should give you the path to all of the files in the folder that you see in Explorer here. So let me just copy and paste that into Notepad. I'm just gonna select this path right here and copy that. Then I can go to Edit, Replace, and then just replace that with nothing. Hit Replace All, and I'm gonna do the same thing for the wave extension here because we don't really need that. All we really need is the file name. Now that I have that list, I'm gonna press Ctrl A and then Ctrl C to copy that. And then when you make a new spreadsheet, you can just paste it right there into that first row. So once we've got the spreadsheet pretty much filled out like how we want it, I'm going to show you how I would use the PersonaVCE tool to automatically convert all of these to ADX in that order and then output them where we need it. You would have to go over to this renaming tab here, and it might look like there's a lot of options, but we really only need to focus on a few of them for now. Let's select this entire row of file names in our spreadsheet, or at least up to where it stops, because remember, some of these aren't Joker, so we're not going to do those. So I have it selected, and I'm going to press Ctrl C to copy, and in PersonaVCE, I could just click right here and press Ctrl V to paste that list that I have copied. And next we need to find our source sound file path. That's going to be where we extracted these wave files to earlier. So I just put them all in the single folder here, the Audacity folder, and renamed files output path. This is where you want the files to go after they're converted. If we go to our mods F emulator AWB folder, we can make a bp01.awb folder named after that file that we're replacing these in. And then this part we can just leave blank because we already filled it out here. And next, over here, let's make sure the suffix is streaming, which it needs to be for these. And we can also append OG name, just so again we can see at a glance like what the original files used to be. Couldn't hurt. And we can leave the start ID alone since we're starting at 0 here. And for left padding, it does need to be 5 digits, so leave that alone. And we can ignore the Ryo settings. And next we can just click copy and rename. So next, let's get the rest of these from ID 45 onward. So just like before, I'm gonna select the first one here and then hold shift, scroll all the way down. And then while I'm still holding shift, I'll click here and that'll select all of them in between. Once again, we can copy, go back to our program and paste that anywhere in this rename tab, and it'll replace the contents with that column that we had selected. And all we have to do that's different this time is for the start ID, put 45 rather than 0. And then once again, let's copy and rename. Okay. So now that these are all done, we should be able to just start the game and hear that the voices in battle are now replaced.
I'll reveal your true form.
Alright, the first move is ours!
What a hassle. I don't want to do this.
This enemy's weak to wind!
Persona!
You can aim for their weak
Yes.
spot!
I hate looking after brats, you know?
Persona!
Live through this.
Joker took one out! Alright! Alright!
Alright, okay, so next I'll talk about system.awb, which is a little different, and let me show you why. So if I open that AWB up into Foobar, you'll notice that we can only see a fraction of the sounds, and that's because if we drag this ACB in here instead, you'll see that that also has a whole bunch of sounds. Now, the sounds that are inside the ACB are known as non-streaming audio. That's why when we've been editing the audio that's only in the AWB, it has that streaming label at the end of the file name here. So let me show you real quick what would happen if you try to extract an ACB that has non-streaming audio. Inside the folder that it created, there are seemingly duplicates of each ID. You've got 0, and then you've got 0 streaming. You've got 1, and then you've got 1 streaming. And that's because this extracted both the non-streaming audio from the ACB, as well as the streamed audio from the AWB. So just like we did with BP1, you can listen to these and you can categorize them and label them in a spreadsheet if you want. You could edit the files in the folder and repack the changes, but I don't really recommend doing that because it can get pretty big, especially voice single word, which is already like hundreds of megabytes as it is. And the problem is, because this contains non-streaming audio, I can't really recommend that you use the F emulator either. We're going to have to go down a completely new path in order to handle this situation. The problem with the F emulator for AWB is that it was never designed to handle non-streaming audio. So the game just crashes if you try to use it on any pair of files that has streamed audio. So for instance, if I made a system AWB folder, it wouldn't even matter if I was only replacing the streamed audio, it would still just crash the game. We need to use a different utility, and that is called Ryo. So just like with any other mod, if you don't already have Ryo, you can go to Reloaded 2, go to the Download Mods tab, and search for Ryo Framework, and download it. Now, if we go here where it says Configure Mod, we can turn on Developer Mode and set the log level to verbose. And that's going to give us a lot of useful information while we're running the game. And now that we have that, we can also go to our mod, go to Edit Mod, and add Ryo as a dependency. So we're doing this because we want to make sure that whenever somebody runs our mod, it also installs and loads Ryo Framework if they don't already have it. So back in our mod folder, I've created a Ryo folder, and inside that you need to make another folder named P5R. And inside there, we can create a folder named System ACB, as opposed to AWB, which is what we've been doing so far in our F emulator folder. And inside here is where our changed files are going to go. So I have my program set up already to handle System ACB. If you go to where it says Don't Output for Ryo and you change that to P5R System ACB, you'll see that it enables all these options right here. So let me set this folder to be my output path. And then I'm just going to copy this row right here and all of the names and then paste it in here like I normally would. And you'll notice this starts at 30 streaming. So I'll make sure that the ID here is 30 and also make sure that streaming is checked, because it is streamed audio after all. And now we have to worry about the category. For categories, we have sound effect, which is 0, 1 which is BGM, 2 for voice, and 3 for system. And then there's a bunch of other more specific ones, but I think for now I'll just set it to voice, which is category 2. And that's just because these are voice clips for a specific character, so that would make the most sense to me. And finally, we can add a folder suffix. I'm just going to put Adachi here so that I know what character this is when I'm looking at it later. So anyway, I'll just click copy and rename. And you'll see that for each of these voice clips, it's putting it into a folder, and let's open that up with Notepad and see what's inside. So we have this YAML file here, and if you open that up with Notepad, it shows that the queue name, it says Battle Recovery right here. When we put output for Ryo with this setting, it automatically matched the wave ID, which is that number we're used to seeing when we extract the ACBs. And it automatically matches it up to something called the queue name, which in this case is Battle Recovery, because Ryo uses the queue name rather than the wave ID to handle the voice replacements. So that's why it's necessary to kind of do it through PersonaVCE rather than what we were doing before. And for category IDs, it just has 2 since we set it to 2, which would be voice. And it's doing that for each clip in the list. So it's giving it its own folder, and the cool thing about these folders is that if you wanted to add more clips, you could just copy and paste more ADX files into this folder. And rather than having this YAML file be named after a specific clip, you can rename it to config.yaml, and then it'll simply apply these properties to every single clip in the folder. So whenever the clip is played back in-game, it'll randomly choose between one of these, and that way you can have a theoretically infinite number of replacements for any individual sound in the game, and that's one of the major advantages of using Ryo Framework. So now I'll show you what to do when you come across non-streamed audio. So that would be these IDs that don't have streaming at the end when you extract them. So this starts at 152. Let me paste this new list in and change the start ID to 152. And then for the suffix, so the suffix for these would not be streaming, so I can remove that. And we can still append the OG name though, so let's uncheck streaming and then we can leave the rest the same. That's good, just copy and rename. And it's going to start adding these, which these look like the sounds for when you're attacking in the field, like when you're trying to get the first strike to start a battle. So yeah, let's go check that out in game and see how it sounds. If a sound seems too repetitive, like for instance this player move one keeps playing the same sound, you can just keep adding more ADX files to that folder until you've achieved the variation that you're looking for. This output log that we set up is going to show you the name of every single sound that plays. It's going to show you what ACB it's from, as well as the Q ID, as well as the Q name. So that way you can manually just create the folder in Ryo and then name it either of those things. So for instance, this one that you'll see that we didn't get replaced is actually from voice single word, which is another ACB that has non-streamed audio. So you would have to use this Ryo setting to generate those if you have a list for that. Otherwise, you can just manually create the folders like this while playing the game and looking at the IDs. Just make sure that you have a config.yaml file in the folder that has the ACB name and either the Q name or the Q ID. You could also put 104, or you could put 104.q and it would also work. And the ACB name would be voice single word, player ID -1, and then the category is still 2 because it's a voice clip. These are the clips that I use in my other mod for getting a battle advantage when you attack the enemy. So that's how you would do that.
The line must be drawn here. Get the fuck out of here.
Alright, I know this has been a pretty long video, but I think that finally covers everything you need to know about editing sounds in the game. In the next video, I'll move on to an entirely new subject. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.